The words hit me like ice water. "You're just a burden, Beatrice. Kelvin only keeps you around out of pity." My daughter-in-law smirked as she said it, standing in my kitchen, wearing jewelry I could have bought 10 times over. She had no idea that the trust fund she'd been begging my son to access, the one funding their lifestyle, their cars, their precious country club membership, wasn't his to give. It was mine, and I was about to teach her exactly what happens when you mistake kindness for weakness. Before we dive into this story, I need you to do something for me. Drop a comment right now and tell me where you're watching from, your city, your country, wherever you are in the world. And please hit the like button for me right now and subscribe to my channel. We're building a community of people who know it's never too late to heal and find the truth. Now back to my story. My name is Beatrice Holloway. I'm 58 years old. And 3 years ago, I made a choice that everyone told me was incredibly generous. I moved into the guest house on my son's property so I could be close to my grandchildren. Everyone praised me for it. "What a devoted grandmother," they said. "How selfless." They had no idea, and neither did Katerina. Let me paint you a picture of that morning. It was a Tuesday in late October, one of those crisp autumn days where the light comes through the windows at just the right angle, making everything look warm and golden. I'd been up since 6, measuring out cocoa powder and vanilla extract, prepping ingredients for Sophia's favorite chocolate cake. Sophia is my granddaughter, 9 years old, gap-toothed smile, eyes exactly like my son's. She'd asked me specifically to make this cake, not her mother, me. I heard Katerina's heels clicking on the hardwood before I saw her. That's the thing about Katerina, she announces herself, always has to make an entrance. She swept into the kitchen wearing workout clothes that probably cost more than most people's monthly rent, her hair pulled back in one of those deliberately messy ponytails that takes 20 minutes to create. Her wrists were dripping with jewelry. A tennis bracelet I'd never seen before caught the light. Diamonds. She didn't even look at me at first. Just went straight to the espresso machine, started making herself a latte with that irritated efficiency of someone who's already decided to be annoyed. "Morning, Katerina," I said, trying to keep my voice light, cheerful. I'd gotten good at that over 3 years. The performance of pleasantness. She glanced at me, and I saw it. That flicker of annoyance that crossed her face whenever she registered my presence, like I was a piece of furniture that had been moved slightly out of place. Beatrice, not Mom, not even Diane, and though she's called me that before, my middle name, like she couldn't be bothered to remember which one I actually used. Just Beatrice, said with the kind of tone you'd use for a stranger. "You're here early." I gestured to the mixing bowls, the ingredients spread across the marble countertop. Sophia's cake. She requested the chocolate one with... "Right," Katerina cut me off, not even trying to hide her disinterest. She was scrolling through her phone now, the espresso machine hissing in the background. "Well, try not to make too much of a mess. I have the book club ladies coming over this afternoon, and I need the kitchen to look presentable." Presentable? As if I was somehow going to trash the place, as if I hadn't been cooking in kitchens since before she was born. But I nodded, I smiled. I went back to sifting flour. That's when she said it. "You know, Beatrice." She paused, took a sip of her latte, studied me over the rim of her cup. There was something calculating in her eyes, something mean. "You're always underfoot, always here, in my space, with your little projects, these old lady hobbies cluttering up my kitchen." The flour sifter froze in my hand, but I didn't turn around, not yet. "I'm just making a cake for Sophia," I said quietly. She asked me to. Of course she did. Katerina's voice had that edge now, that particular sharpness she reserved for moments when she wanted to cut. "Because you're always here, always available, always ready to swoop in and play the hero grandmother. Do you know what that makes Kelvin and me look like? Like we're not enough for our own children." I did turn then, looked at her directly. She was leaning against the counter now, arms crossed, that new bracelet glittering on her wrist. "That's not my intention," I said. "I just want to be part of their lives." "Well, maybe you're too much a part of our lives." She adjusted the bracelet absently, and I watched the diamonds catch the light. You're just a burden, Beatrice. Let's be honest here. Kelvin only keeps you around out of pity. This whole setup, you living in the guest house, always hanging around, it's charity. And frankly, we could use that space for something else, a home gym maybe, or a proper office. The words hit like ice water. Burden, pity, charity. I felt my hands start to shake, so I gripped the edge of the counter, kept my face neutral, kept my voice steady. I see, I said. Katerina smirked. Actually smirked, like she'd won something. I'm not trying to be cruel, she said, in that tone people use when they're absolutely trying to be cruel. I'm just being practical. You're getting older, and at some point, you're going to need more care than we can provide. Maybe it's time to start thinking about other living arrangements, more appropriate ones. She meant a nursing home. She didn't say it, but I heard it. I watched her take another sip of her latte, watched her check her phone again, watched her toss her ponytail over her shoulder. She was already done with the conversation, already moving on to whatever else was on her agenda for the day, and she had no idea, absolutely no idea, what she'd just done. I'll think about it, I said softly. Good. Katerina set down her cup, grabbed her car keys from the hook by the door. I'm off to Pilates. Try to have this cleaned up before noon, okay? She left. I heard her heels clicking away, heard the front door close, heard her car start in the driveway. And then I stood there, alone in that kitchen I'd been treating like my own for 3 years, and something inside me crystallized, something cold, something clear, something that had been building for 36 months of small humiliations, casual dismissals, and quiet cruelties. You see, I'd been patient. I'd been kind. I'd bitten my tongue through 3 years of being treated like hired help in my own son's home. 3 years of being excluded from family photos, of being referred to as Kelvin's mother instead of by my name, of watching Katerina take credit for meals I'd cooked and events I'd planned. I told myself it was fine, that I was here for the grandchildren, that I was being the bigger person. But there's a difference between being patient and being a doormat, and Katerina had just mistaken one for the other. I looked down at the flour on my hands, at the ingredients for Sophia's cake spread across the counter, at the diamonds on Katerina's forgotten coffee cup, still sitting where she'd left it, and I smiled, because Katerina didn't know the truth. Neither did my son, neither did anyone, really, except for my attorney Grace and my sister Margaret. The truth was this: I wasn't living in that guest house because I needed to. I wasn't there out of necessity or desperation, or because I had nowhere else to go. I was there because I'd chosen to be. And the money that paid for everything, the sprawling main house, Katerina's Mercedes in the driveway, that diamond bracelet on her wrist, the country club membership she loved to flaunt, Kelvin's successful real estate development career, the private schools for the children, every single luxury they'd enjoyed for the past decade. That money didn't belong to my son. It belonged to me. Let me back up. Let me tell you how I got here. 4 years ago, I divorced my husband, Richard, Kelvin's father. It was ugly. 28 years of marriage ending in lawyers and accusations, and a man who thought he was entitled to everything I had simply because we'd shared a bed for nearly 3 decades. Richard was a charming man, successful, or so everyone thought. VP of operations at a mid-size manufacturing firm. Nice salary, nice benefits, nice reputation. But here's what nobody knew. Richard had always been terrible with money, gambled, made bad investments, kept secrets. And when my father died, my brilliant self-made father who'd built Holloway Industrial from nothing, who'd created an empire in steel manufacturing and distribution, Richard assumed that money would become ours. He was wrong. My father knew exactly what kind of man Richard was, known it for years, watched him, assessed him, and decided that when he died, his fortune would be protected. Not from creditors or taxes or market crashes, from my husband. So he created a trust, An ironclad, airtight, unbreakable trust with one administrator, one person who could authorize any distributions or changes. Me. Not Richard, not Kelvin. Me. $127 million in the trust principal, plus the ongoing income from Holloway Industrial, which I'd sold to a competitor for a substantial sum before the divorce. Richard fought for it. Oh, how he fought. His lawyers argued that marital assets should be split equally, that he was entitled to half. But you can't split what you don't own. My father's trust had been set up long before my marriage. The money had never been marital property. It was mine, separate and protected, and Richard's lawyers eventually had to admit defeat. He got the house we'd lived in together. Got his pension, got a reasonable settlement, and I got my freedom and my father's legacy. When the divorce finalized, I could have done anything, gone anywhere. I had enough money to buy a penthouse in Manhattan or a villa in Tuscany or anywhere else I wanted. But my son, my sweet, somewhat naive son Kelvin, he was hurting, watching his parents' marriage implode, trying to hold his own young family together while managing his own career and his own life. And I wanted to know my grandchildren. So I made a choice. I bought a piece of property adjacent to the land Kelvin and Katerina had recently purchased, a beautiful 5-acre lot with a small guest house on it. I sold it to Kelvin for $1 with the stipulation that I retained a life estate, meaning I could live in that guest house for as long as I wanted. And I set up a monthly distribution from my trust to Kelvin's account, $45,000 a month, enough to fund his lifestyle, his business, his family's comfort. He thought it was from his grandfather's trust, a standard inheritance. I never corrected him. I wanted him to feel like a man, like he'd earned his success, like he wasn't just living on his mother's money. I wanted him to have pride, but I also kept control. Because my father taught me something important. Trust, but verify. Love, but protect yourself. Every month, I signed the authorization for that distribution. Every major expense, the house down payment, the cars, the club membership, came through me, and nobody knew. Kelvin thought his grandfather had left him well provided for. Katerina thought her husband was successful, that they'd earned their lifestyle through Kelvin's business acumen and her social climbing. They had no idea that every penny flowed through my approval. And standing there in that kitchen, flour on my hands and Katerina's words still ringing in my ears, burden, pity, charity, I made a decision. It was time for them to learn the truth. I cleaned up the baking supplies, washed my hands, walked back to my guest house, on my land, that I'd given to my son as a gift he didn't even fully understand, and I called Grace. Grace Chen has been my attorney for 15 years, sharp as a blade, loyal as a guard dog, with a mind for contract law that would make Supreme Court justices weep with envy. She'd handled my divorce. She'd managed the trust restructuring after my father's death. She knew every detail of my financial life. "Beatrice," she answered on the second ring. "Everything all right?" "Grace," I said, my voice steady now, cold now, clear now. "I need you to freeze all distributions from the trust, effective immediately." There was a pause. Then, "All distributions, including Kelvin's monthly allowance?" "Especially Kelvin's monthly allowance." Another pause. I could practically hear her mind working through the implications. "May I ask why?" "Because it's time my family learned exactly who's been taking care of them all these years, and it's time they learned what happens when you mistake kindness for weakness." I heard Grace exhale, not disapproval, something else, something like satisfaction. "Consider it done," she said. "I'll file the paperwork this morning. Everything will be frozen by noon. Beatrice." "Are you sure about this?" I looked out the window of my guest house. Across the lawn I could see the main house, the house I'd helped buy, filled with furniture I'd helped pay for, home to a daughter-in-law who thought I was nothing more than a burden. "I've never been more sure of anything in my life," I said. By noon, it was done. Every automatic transfer stopped, every account that depended on trust distributions frozen. The monthly allowance that had been depositing into Kelvin's account like clockwork for years. Gone. I didn't tell them, didn't warn them, just let the reality crash into their lives like a wave. And then I waited. It took 3 days. 3 days before Kelvin's accountant, David, called him in a panic. 3 days before the country club membership payment bounced. 3 days before Katerina tried to use her personal shopping account and found it overdrawn. I watched it unfold from my guest house, watched Kelvin's car pull into the driveway early from work, watched him pace on the phone on the back patio, watched Katerina's confusion turn to irritation, turn to panic. And on the evening of the 3rd day, Kelvin called me. "Mom?" His voice was strained. "Mom, something's wrong with Grandpa's trust. The distributions have stopped and David can't figure out why. Do you know anything about this?" I could have told him then, could have explained everything over the phone, but that's not how this needed to happen. "Come over," I said. "Bring Katerina, we need to talk." She's upset, Mom. Maybe just you and me." "Both of you," I said firmly. 20 minutes. My place." I hung up before he could argue, and then I went to my safe, pulled out the burgundy folder I'd had Grace prepare months ago, because part of me had known even then that this moment would eventually come. Inside that folder was the truth, all of it, documented, certified, undeniable. I made tea, set out 3 cups, sat in my small living room and waited. When the knock came, I was ready. Kelvin entered first, my son, 32 years old, tall like his grandfather, with eyes that used to look at me with uncomplicated love. Now they were confused, worried, trying to solve a problem he didn't understand. Katerina came in behind him. She'd changed out of her workout clothes into something more formal, like she was preparing for a business meeting. Her face was tight, controlled, but I could see the anxiety underneath. Good. "Sit," I said, gesturing to the couch. They sat. Kelvin perched on the edge, nervous. Katerina crossed her legs, wrapped her arms around herself defensively. "Mom, what's going on?" Kelvin asked. "David says the trust administrator has frozen everything, and when he tried to reach out, they said only you could authorize changes. But that doesn't make sense. Grandpa's trust. That's family money, right? Why would you have control over—" I slid the burgundy folder across the coffee table. "Open it," I said. Kelvin looked at me, then at the folder, then reached forward and flipped it open. And as he started reading, as his face changed from confusion to disbelief to something like awe, I began to speak. "That trust doesn't come from your grandfather in the way you thought," I said. "It comes from my father." Holloway Industrial, the company he built, the fortune he made, all of it went into a trust with me as the sole administrator and primary beneficiary. Kelvin was flipping through pages now, trust documents, account statements, distribution histories. "Every month for the past 10 years, I've authorized your allowance, $45,000 deposited automatically into your account. Every major purchase, the down payment on this house, your cars, the club membership, all of it came through my approval." I watched Katerina lean over, trying to see what Kelvin was reading, watched her eyes widen as she recognized numbers, dates, signatures. "When your father and I divorced, he thought he was entitled to half of everything, but he wasn't, because my father was smarter than that. He protected me, protected this money, made sure that no matter what happened, I would be secure." I stood up, walked to the window, looked out at the main house. "I chose to live here," I continued, my voice soft now but steel underneath. "Not because I needed to, not because I had nowhere else to go, but because I wanted to be close to Sophia and Leo. I wanted to be part of their lives, and I thought, foolishly perhaps, that I could help my son without making him feel like he was living on his mother's charity." I turned back to face them. "So I never told you the full extent of my control over that money. I let you think you'd inherited a standard trust from your grandfather. I let you believe you were successful, that you'd earned this lifestyle." Kelvin's face had gone pale. He was still holding the folder, staring at the numbers. $127 million. But this week, Vogue, I said, looking directly at Katerina now, I was informed that I'm a burden, that I'm here out of pity, that I'm charity, that you could use my space for a home gym. Katerina's face had gone from tan to gray. And it made me realize something, I continued. I've been too kind, too quiet, too willing to be invisible, and some people, I looked pointedly at Katerina, mistake invisibility for powerlessness. The room was silent. Kelvin was still staring at the documents. Katerina had frozen, her arms still wrapped around herself, but now she looked like she was trying to physically hold herself together. So the distributions are frozen, I said simply. All of them. Until further notice. Mom, Kelvin started. No. My voice was sharp now, final. You stayed silent, Kelvin. When she talked about sending me to a nursing home, when she called me a burden, when she treated me like hired help for 3 years, you stayed silent. Your silence told me everything I needed to know. Kelvin's eyes filled with tears. I never thought. No, you didn't think. You chose the easy path. You chose not to see what was right in front of you because it was uncomfortable. I turned to Katerina. She was trembling now, but whether from rage or fear or shame, I couldn't tell. And you, I said quietly, you called me a burden. You treated me like I was worthless. You have no idea what I sacrificed to give my son a sense of pride, to let him feel like a man instead of a boy living on his mother's money. Katerina opened her mouth, closed it. No words came out. So here are the terms, I said. The freeze stays in place until I decide otherwise. You'll both learn, really learn, what it means to respect another human being. Not because I'm paying your bills, though I am, but because I'm a person who deserves basic human decency. I picked up my teacup, took a sip, let the silence stretch. Or, I continued, we can make this permanent. I can cut off the distributions forever. Kelvin can learn to live on what he actually earns. You can sell this house, the cars, the club membership. You can learn what life looks like without my support. Katerina stood up suddenly, tears streaming down her face now, but they weren't tears of remorse. They were tears of rage, of humiliation, of someone who just realized they'd been playing a game they didn't know existed and losing badly. This is blackmail, she hissed. No, I said calmly. This is consequence. There's a difference. She grabbed her purse, stormed toward the door, then turned back. Kelvin, are you coming? But my son was still sitting there, still holding that folder, still staring at the evidence of everything he hadn't known about his own life. He looked up at his wife, then at me, and he stayed seated. Katerina's face twisted. She yanked open the door and left, slamming it behind her. The silence that followed was thick, heavy with everything unsaid for years. Mom, Kelvin finally whispered, I'm so sorry. I know, I said, but sorry isn't enough. Not yet. He nodded, set down the folder with shaking hands. What do I do? He asked, and he sounded like a little boy again, lost and scared. You figure out what kind of man you want to be, I said. The kind who stands up for the people he loves, or the kind who stays silent because it's easier. He left a few minutes later, walking slowly across the lawn toward the house where his wife was surely waiting, surely furious, surely planning her next move. And I sat in my guest house, tea growing cold in my cup, and wondered if I'd just saved my family or destroyed it. But here's the thing about playing the long game. You have to be willing to lose everything to win what matters. And what mattered was teaching my family, teaching everyone that there's a difference between kindness and weakness, that being underestimated is sometimes a gift, and that the quietest person in the room isn't always the powerless one. Sometimes she's the one holding all the cards. You know what's interesting about power? It's not the having of it that changes you. It's the moment you decide to use it. And I just pulled the trigger. The morning after my confrontation with Kelvin and Katerina, I woke up at 5:30, same time I always do, made my coffee, and sat by the window of my guest house watching the main house like I was observing some kind of nature documentary, waiting to see what would happen when the predators realized their food source had disappeared. The lights came on in Kelvin's home office at 6:15, earlier than usual. I could see his silhouette moving back and forth, pacing, phone pressed to his ear. Even from across the lawn, I could read the body language: panic, confusion, desperation. He was calling David, his accountant, probably for the 4th or 5th time since last night. And David was probably telling him the same thing Grace had instructed him to say. The trust administrator has suspended all distributions pending a comprehensive review. Only Mrs. Beatrice Holloway can authorize any changes or releases. I took a sip of my coffee and watched my son fall apart. Is that cruel? Maybe. But let me ask you something. How many years of cruelty do you have to endure before defending yourself stops being cruel and starts being survival? By 7 o'clock, Katerina's Mercedes was gone from the driveway. She'd left early. Probably couldn't stand to be in the same house as Kelvin, or maybe she was already out trying to solve the problem her way. Shopping therapy, perhaps. Except her credit cards were about to start declining, and she didn't know it yet. The thought made me smile into my coffee cup. Around 8, my phone rang. Kelvin. I let it ring 4 times before answering, let him sit with the anticipation. "Good morning, sweetheart," I said, keeping my voice warm, neutral, giving him nothing. "Mom." His voice was wrecked, like he hadn't slept. "Mom, I've been on the phone with David all morning. He says the trust has been frozen, all of it. The automatic payments, the distributions, everything. He says only you can unfreeze it." "That's correct," I said simply. Silence. I could hear him breathing, trying to figure out what to say next. "Mom, I don't understand. Why would Grandpa's trust be under your control? I always thought it was a standard inheritance, money he left to me and you equally, managed by some firm in Boston." "There is no firm in Boston, Kelvin." I stood up, walked to the window, watched his office light. "There never was. It's been me this entire time. Me reviewing every distribution, me approving every major expense, me signing off on $45,000 a month going into your account so you could live the life you've been living." Another silence, longer this time. Why didn't you tell me?" His voice cracked. "Why would you let me think?" "Because I wanted you to have pride," I said, and I meant it. "Because I didn't want you to feel like a child living on his mother's allowance. I wanted you to feel like a man who'd earned his success. Was that wrong of me?" No, of course not, but..." He was scrambling now, trying to find solid ground. "Mom, we can fix this. Whatever Katerina said, whatever happened, we can fix it. Just unfreeze the accounts. Please, we have bills, obligations. The mortgage is due next week and the country club..." "Kelvin." My voice went cold. "Do you know what your wife said to me in that kitchen 3 days ago?" He didn't answer. "She called me a burden. She said you keep me around out of pity. She suggested I should start looking at nursing homes because I'm getting older, and you can't provide the care I'll need." I paused. Let that sink in. "And do you know what you did at Thanksgiving when she announced to the entire family that I should find more appropriate accommodations?" Still silence. "You did nothing. You said nothing. You sat there and let your wife humiliate me in front of everyone because it was easier than standing up to her. Mom, I was going to talk to her. I was going to..." "When, Kelvin? When were you going to talk to her?" "After she'd already shipped me off to some facility? After she'd taken over my guest house and turned it into her yoga studio, or whatever else she had planned?" I heard him exhale shakily. Then, "What do you want me to do?" And there it was, the question that mattered. "I want you to figure out what kind of man you are," I said. "The kind who stands up for his mother, or the kind who hides from conflict because his wife is difficult. I want you to look at your life, really look at it, and understand that everything you have came through my generosity. Not your grandfather's, not your father's, mine." "I'm looking at it now," he whispered. "I've been looking at it all night. Mom, I had no idea. I swear to God I had no idea how much you'd done for us. Good. That's a start. I softened my voice slightly. The freeze stays in place, Kelvin. Until I decide otherwise, you need to learn to stand on your own feet, and Katerina needs to learn that actions have consequences. She's really upset, Mom. She's been crying all night. She didn't mean... Yes, she did. I cut him off. She meant every word. And the only reason she's crying now is because she finally understands she messed with the wrong person. I hung up before he could respond. Was I being too harsh? Maybe. But here's what I learned from my father. If you're going to make a move, make it decisive. No half measures, no room for doubt. You have to be willing to burn it all down to rebuild it right. The next 48 hours were fascinating to watch, like observing a controlled demolition. The country club called. The membership payment had bounced. Katerina spent 3 hours on the phone trying to explain it was a banking error, promising it would be resolved within days. I could hear the desperation in her voice from across the lawn. She'd left the windows open, and sound carries. Then the Mercedes dealership called. The lease payment was declined. They were very professional about it, but the message was clear. Resolve this in the next 30 days or the car gets repossessed. Kelvin's business account started having issues. He'd been floating certain expenses on credit, planning to pay them back with the trust distribution. Now those bills were coming due, and the money wasn't there. I watched them scramble, watched them fight, their voices carrying through the evening air. Watched Katerina's car leave and not come back until 2 in the morning, and I felt, what? Satisfaction? Guilt? Some complicated mixture of both? But mostly I felt resolve. On the 3rd day, Katerina came to my door. She knocked, which was a first. Usually she just walked in like she owned the place. But now she stood on my doorstep, and when I opened the door, I barely recognized her. No makeup. Hair pulled back in a messy ponytail, not the deliberately styled kind, the actual messy kind. She'd been crying. Her eyes were red and swollen. "Beatrice," she said, and her voice was small, broken. "Can we talk?" I almost said no, almost closed the door in her face. Would have been justified, right? But I stepped aside and let her in. She sat on my couch, the same couch where I'd shown Kelvin the trust documents, and for a long moment she just stared at her hands. The diamond bracelet was gone. I noticed that immediately. "I sold it," she said, catching me looking. "The bracelet. Got $5,000 for it. It's not enough to cover even half of what we need this month, but it's something." I didn't respond, just waited. "I didn't know," she said finally. "I swear to God, Beatrice, I didn't know it was your money. All of it. Kelvin never told me. He said he had an inheritance from his grandfather, that we were set, that we didn't have to worry. I thought we'd earned it, that he'd earned it." "And that gave you the right to treat me like help?" I asked quietly. She flinched. No, of course not. She stopped, swallowed hard. "I was awful to you. I know I was, but I didn't realize that I had power." I finished for her. "That I wasn't just some sad old woman living in your guest house out of charity." Tears spilled down her cheeks. "I'm sorry. I'm so sorry." I studied her face, looking for sincerity, looking for truth. You know what I saw? Fear, desperation, the panic of someone whose entire life is crumbling and who's finally realized they caused it themselves. But was it remorse? Real, genuine remorse? I wasn't sure yet. "Why did you do it?" I asked. "Why did you treat me that way? What did I ever do to you except try to be part of this family?" Katerina wiped her eyes with the back of her hand. "I don't know. I think I was jealous." That surprised me. Jealous? Of what? Of how much the kids love you, of how Kelvin lights up when you're around, of how easy everything seems for you. She laughed bitterly. "Which is insane, because obviously nothing was easy for you. You made it look easy. And I think I resented that. I resented that you could just show up and be grandmother of the year while I was struggling to get Sophia to eat vegetables or Leo to do his homework." She looked up at me then, and I saw something in her eyes I hadn't expected. genuine pain. My own mother was cold, she continued, her voice barely above a whisper. She was all about appearances, about status, about what people thought. Nothing I did was ever good enough for her. And I think I learned from her that love is something you earn through achievement, through status, through being perfect. She was crying harder now. And when you just loved those kids unconditionally, when they loved you back so easily, it made me feel like I was failing, like I was my mother, like no matter what I did, I'd never be enough. I sat down across from her. My anger hadn't disappeared, but it had shifted into something more complicated. So you made me the enemy, I said. Yes, she nodded. Yes, I did, and I was wrong. I was so wrong, Beatrice. I took out all my own issues on you, and you didn't deserve that. You didn't deserve any of it. The room fell silent except for her crying, and I had to decide. Was this manipulation? Was this a performance designed to get me to unfreeze the money? Or was this real? Katerina, I said finally, I appreciate the apology, I do. But apologies are just words. I need to see change, real, sustained change. She looked up at me, hope and fear mixed on her face. The freeze stays in place, I continued. For now. You and Kelvin need to learn what it's like to live without my safety net. You need to figure out who you are when you're not playing with house money. Her face fell. But, I said, I'm not cruel. I'm not trying to destroy my own family. So here's what's going to happen. Kelvin's distributions will resume in a reduced amount. Enough to cover your mortgage and basic bills. Nothing more. He's going to have to actually work, actually build his business with his own effort, not rely on trust fund money to float him. I leaned forward. And you're going to prove to me that you've changed, not with words, with actions. Can you do that? Katerina nodded frantically. Yes, I'll do anything. I'll go to therapy. You'll start by treating me like a human being, I interrupted, like someone worthy of basic respect. Not because I'm bankrolling your life, but because I'm a person, a mother, a grandmother, someone who deserves dignity. I will, she said. I promise, I will. She left a few minutes later, and I watched her walk back across the lawn to the main house, her shoulders slumped, her whole body radiating defeat. And I wondered, had I just witnessed genuine remorse? Or had I just watched a masterclass in manipulation? Time would tell. But here's the thing about giving someone a second chance. You have to mean it. You can't offer grace with one hand while keeping a weapon in the other. So I called Grace. Reduce Kelvin's monthly distribution to $20,000, I told her. Enough for mortgage, utilities, basic expenses, nothing more. The rest of their lifestyle they'll have to earn. And if they can't, Grace asked, then they'll learn to live differently. I said, like the rest of the world. Grace was quiet for a moment. Then, when you first told me you were moving into that guest house, I thought you were making a mistake. I thought you were setting yourself up to be taken advantage of. You were right, I admitted. But you're handling it now, she said, and I could hear the approval in her voice. You're teaching them the lesson they need to learn. I'm proud of you, Bea. After I hung up with Grace, I should have felt better, vindicated, in control. But instead, I felt hollow. Because here's what nobody tells you about wielding power. It's lonely. It isolates you. It makes you wonder if people will ever love you for who you are, or just for what you can give them. That night, I couldn't sleep. I kept thinking about Katerina's tears, about Kelvin's confusion, about whether I was being fair or just being cruel. Around midnight, I heard a knock on my door. I pulled on my robe, checked the peephole. Kelvin. When I opened the door, he looked worse than Katerina had. Unshaven, exhausted, lost. Mom, he said, can I come in? We sat in my small living room, and for a long time neither of us spoke. Finally, Kelvin broke the silence. I found Dad's old files, he said quietly. From the divorce. I found the court documents, the settlement papers, everything. I felt my stomach tighten. I saw what he tried to do, Kelvin continued. How he tried to take your money. how his lawyers fought to claim Grandpa's trust was marital property. I saw how ugly it got. He looked at me, and his eyes were full of tears. And I saw how you protected me from all of it. You never told me how bad it was. You never made me choose sides. You handled it. You took care of everything. You were my son, I said softly. I wasn't going to put that burden on you. But I should have known, he said. I should have asked more questions. I should have paid attention. Instead, I just accepted the easy version. The version where Dad was a good guy who got screwed in the divorce, and you were fine, and everything worked out. He wiped his eyes roughly. I'm sorry, Mom. I'm sorry I didn't see what you were sacrificing for me. I'm sorry I let Katerina treat you the way she did. I'm sorry I was too much of a coward to stand up to her. Kelvin, no, let me finish. He took a shaky breath. I've spent the last 3 days looking at our finances, really looking at them for the first time. And you know what I realized? I'm not actually good at this. My business is mediocre at best. I've been coasting on trust fund money, pretending I'm successful, while you've been bankrolling everything. He laughed bitterly. I'm 32 years old, and I've been living like a teenager with a rich parent, and I didn't even know it. That was partially my fault, I said. I wanted you to have confidence. I wanted you to feel successful. But I wasn't successful, he said. I was just comfortable. There's a difference. He leaned forward, elbows on his knees, head in his hands. I need to learn to stand on my own feet, he said quietly. I need to figure out who I am without your money propping me up, and I need to be a better husband, a better father, a better son. I reached over and put my hand on his shoulder. You're already being a better son, I said. By having this conversation, by being honest about where you've failed, that takes courage. He looked up at me. Will you give me a chance to prove I can change? And there it was again, that question, the one that mattered. I've already started, I said. I've reduced your distributions, but I haven't cut you off completely. You'll have enough to keep your house, keep your family fed and safe. But the rest, the luxury, you'll have to earn that. Good, he said. That's good. I need that. We need that. He stood to leave, then turned back. Mom, I love you, and I'm sorry it took losing your support to realize how much you've done for me. That shouldn't have been what it took. After he left, I sat in the darkness of my living room and cried. Not sad tears, not exactly. Relief tears. Because for the first time in 3 years, my son had really seen me, not as a convenient grandmother or a burden or a charity case, but as his mother, as a person who'd sacrificed and protected and loved him through everything. The next 2 weeks were a study in adjustment. Kelvin threw himself into his business with a focus I'd never seen before. He started taking on smaller clients, projects he'd previously thought were beneath him. Started actually working instead of just coasting. Katerina started therapy. I didn't ask her to. She did it on her own, twice a week, with a woman named Dr. Patricia, who specialized in family dynamics and attachment issues. And slowly, gradually, things started to shift. Katerina stopped dropping by to beg for money or make promises. Instead, she started dropping by to ask if I wanted to join her for coffee, to see if I wanted to help Sophia with her science project, to invite me to family dinner, not as the cook, but as a guest. The first few times I said no. I wasn't ready to trust it yet. But then Sophia came to my door, alone, holding a handwritten invitation. Please come to dinner, Grandma, she said. I miss you, and I helped Mom make the food. It's probably not as good as yours, but we tried. How do you say no to that? So I went. The dinner was awkward at first. Katerina had made roasted chicken, overcooked, but edible. Leo told me about his soccer game. Sophia showed me her art project. Kelvin talked about a new client he'd landed, and I could hear the pride in his voice. Real pride, not borrowed confidence. And Katerina. Katerina was quiet, attentive. She served everyone else before herself. She asked me questions, real questions, and about my day, my interests, my life. It wasn't perfect, it wasn't fixed, but it was different. After dinner, while Kelvin was putting the kids to bed, Katerina and I stood in the kitchen doing dishes together. "Thank you for coming," she said quietly. "I know you didn't have to." "Sophia invited me," I said. I couldn't say no to her. "She misses you," Katerina said. "They both do, and so do I, if I'm being honest." I looked at her, really looked at her. She'd lost weight, stress, probably. There were dark circles under her eyes, but there was something else too, something softer, less performative. "Are you really in therapy?" I asked. "Twice a week," she confirmed. "Dr. Patricia is helping me understand why I've been the way I've been. It's not an excuse, but it's helping me see patterns I didn't recognize before." She dried a plate carefully. "My mother called the other day, heard about our financial difficulties through the family grapevine. You know what she said?" I waited. She said, "I always knew you'd end up like this. You were never as smart as you thought you were." Katerina's voice was flat, emotionless. And I realized I've been hearing that voice in my head my entire life, telling me I'm not enough, that I have to perform, achieve, prove myself constantly. And I took it out on you because you made it look so easy. You just existed, and people loved you for it. "It wasn't easy," I said quietly. "I just didn't broadcast my struggles." "I know that now." She set down the plate. "I'm not asking you to forgive me. Not yet. I haven't earned that. But I want you to know I'm trying, really trying, not just to get the money back, but to be a better person, a better mother, a better daughter-in-law." I dried my hands, turned to face her fully. "Katerina, I appreciate that, truly. But here's what I need you to understand. This isn't about the money. It never was. It was about respect. It was about dignity. It was about being treated like a human being who deserves basic kindness." "I know," she whispered, "and I'm so sorry it took losing everything for me to see that." We stood there in that kitchen, the kitchen where she'd first called me a burden, and something shifted between us. Not forgiveness, not yet, but maybe the beginning of understanding. Later that night, back in my guest house, I called Grace. "How's the great experiment going?" she asked. "Better than expected," I admitted. "Kelvin's actually working. Katerina's in therapy. They're struggling, but they're trying." "And how are you feeling about it?" I thought about that. How was I feeling? "Cautiously optimistic," I said, "and also exhausted. Playing God with people's lives is harder than I thought it would be." Grace laughed. "You're not playing God, Bea. You're just being a parent, setting boundaries, enforcing consequences. That's what parents do. Even when it hurts? Especially when it hurts." As I hung up with Grace, I realized something. I was still holding my breath, still waiting for the other shoe to drop, still waiting to see if this change was real or just a performance designed to get what they wanted. Because here's the question I couldn't shake. Can people really change, or do they just get better at hiding who they've always been? And more importantly, how long do you wait to find out? How many second chances do you give before you're just enabling the same bad behavior? I didn't have the answers yet, but I knew one thing for certain. I wasn't going to be a victim anymore. I wasn't going to be invisible. I wasn't going to be the woman who stayed quiet while people walked all over her. I'd found my voice, and I wasn't giving it up. Not for anyone. Not ever again. But here's the question that kept me awake at night for the next 3 months. When someone shows you who they really are and then tries to show you someone different, which version do you believe? Because Katerina was trying. I had to give her that. It started small, the kind of small gestures you might miss if you weren't paying attention. But I was paying attention. I'd been paying attention for 3 years, and I'd learned to read the subtle shifts in my family's dynamics like a meteorologist reads storm patterns. 2 weeks after that awkward family dinner, I found a note slipped under my door, handwritten, not typed, not texted, actual pen on actual paper. "Dear Beatrice," it read, "I'm taking the kids to the farmer's market Saturday morning. Would you like to come? No pressure, just thought it might be nice. Katerina." I stared at that note for a long time, analyzed the handwriting, the word choices, looking for manipulation, looking for ulterior motives. But sometimes a note is just a note. I went to the farmer's market. Katerina didn't perform that morning, didn't put on a show for other shoppers or try to prove anything. She just walked beside me while Sophia held my hand and Leo ran ahead looking at the flower stalls. When Sophia wanted to buy me flowers with her allowance money, daisies, my favorites, Katerina smiled and said, "That's a beautiful idea, sweetheart." Not, "We can't afford that right now." Not, "Grandma doesn't need flowers." Just kindness. We bought vegetables. Katerina asked my opinion on everything, which tomatoes looked best, whether the peaches were ripe enough, if I thought the honey was worth the price. She listened when I answered, actually listened, like my opinions mattered. On the drive home, Sophia fell asleep against my shoulder, and Katerina caught my eye in the rearview mirror. "Thank you for coming," she said quietly. "Thank you for inviting me," I replied, and for the first time in 3 years. It didn't feel like a performance, but I still didn't trust it. Not completely. Because here's what I'd learned from my father, from my divorce, from 58 years of navigating relationships and power dynamics. People can change their behavior without changing their hearts. They can do the right things for the wrong reasons. So I waited, and I watched. A month passed, then 2. Kelvin was a different man. He'd thrown himself into his real estate business with the kind of hungry determination I'd seen in my own father when he was building Holloway Industrial. He started waking up at 5:30, making calls, chasing leads, actually working for his clients instead of just collecting commissions. One evening, he came to my guest house with a bottle of wine and 2 glasses. "I closed a deal today," he said, and his smile was genuine. Proud. A commercial property, big commission, the biggest I've ever earned on my own merit. We sat on my small porch, watching the sunset, and he told me about it. The negotiations, the challenges, how he'd almost lost the deal twice but figured out how to save it. "It felt different, Mom, so," he said, "earning it myself, not having your trust fund as a safety net. It felt real." "That's because it was real," I said. He looked at me then, and there were tears in his eyes. "I'm ashamed of how long I lived without understanding that, how long I let you subsidize my pride." "You didn't know," I said gently. "I didn't tell you." I should have asked more questions. He took a sip of wine, but I'm asking them now, and I'm trying to be the man you raised me to be, the man Grandpa would have been proud of. I reached over and squeezed his hand. "Your grandfather would be very proud of you right now." We sat in comfortable silence, and I felt something I hadn't felt in years. Hope. Real, genuine hope that maybe, just maybe, my family was actually healing. But there was still Katerina. The therapy was continuing. Twice a week, every week, without fail. I knew because Sophia mentioned it casually one day while we were baking cookies together. "Mom's always tired after her doctor appointments," she said, carefully measuring flour. "But she says it's a good tired, like when you work really hard at something important." "That's exactly what it's like," I told her. 3 months after the freeze, Katerina asked to meet me for coffee. Just the 2 of us. No Kelvin, no kids, no audience. We met at a small cafe downtown. She was already there when I arrived, sitting at a corner table. No makeup, hair in a simple ponytail, wearing jeans and a sweater instead of her usual designer armor. "Thank you for coming," she said as I sat down. "Of course." We ordered coffee, made small talk about the weather, about the kids, dancing around what we both knew we needed to discuss. Finally, Katerina set down her cup and looked at me directly. "I need to tell you something," she said, "and I need you to just listen, okay? Don't respond yet. Just let me say it." I nodded. "I've been in therapy for 3 months now, working through a lot of things. My relationship with my mother, my need for external validation, my fear of not being enough." She took a shaky breath. "And Dr. Patricia helped me see something I'd been avoiding. I was treating you the way my mother treated me." She looked down at her hands. My whole childhood. Nothing I did was good enough for her. She was cold, critical, always comparing me to other people's daughters. and I promised myself I'd never be like her. But then I became a mother myself, and I realized I didn't know how to do it differently. All I knew was criticism and control. Tears started falling, but she didn't wipe them away. When you came into our lives, this warm, loving grandmother who the kids adored instantly, it triggered something in me. You made it look so easy, so natural, and it made me feel like I was failing, like I was my mother. So instead of learning from you, I pushed you away. I diminished you. I tried to make you small so I could feel bigger. She finally looked up at me, and I'm so sorry. Not because I want your money back, not because I'm trying to manipulate you, but because you deserved better. You deserved kindness and respect, and I gave you cruelty instead. I sat with that for a moment, with her words, with her tears. Do you understand why I did what I did? I asked quietly. Why I froze the trust? Yes, she said immediately. You were teaching me a lesson I desperately needed to learn. That people aren't disposable. That kindness isn't weakness. That actions have consequences. And have you learned it? She nodded. I'm still learning it, every day. Dr. Patricia says healing isn't linear. Some days I do better than others. But I'm trying, Beatrice, really trying. Not to get something from you, but to become someone I can respect when I look in the mirror. I studied her face, looked for the performance, looked for the manipulation. But all I saw was a broken woman trying to put herself back together. I believe you, I said finally. Her eyes widened. You do? I believe you're trying. I believe you're sincere. But Katerina, belief isn't the same as trust. Trust takes time. Trust has to be earned through consistent action, not just good intentions. I understand, she said, and I'm willing to put in the time, however long it takes. We talked for another hour, about her childhood, about mine, about the ways we'd both been damaged and the ways we were both trying to heal. And when we left that cafe, something had shifted between us. Not friendship exactly, not yet, but the beginning of something real. That evening, I called Grace. I want to restructure the trust distributions, I told her. Again? She sounded amused. Kelvin's proven himself. He's working hard, building his business legitimately. I want to increase his monthly allowance to $30,000. Still less than before, but enough to give them some breathing room. And what about the big decisions? Major purchases? Investments? Those still come through me, I said firmly. I'm not giving up control, but I'm acknowledging progress. What changed your mind? Grace asked. I thought about that. About farmers' markets and coffee conversations, about Kelvin's pride in his earned success, and Katerina's tears. They're changing, I said. Really changing, and I think it's time to acknowledge that. You're a better person than I am, Grace said. I would have left them hanging longer. Maybe, I admitted. But I didn't do this to punish them forever. I did it to teach them, and I think they've learned the lesson. 6 months after the freeze, we had Thanksgiving again. This time was different, so different. Katerina and I cooked together, actually together, not her taking credit for my work. She asked me to teach her my recipes, wrote them down in a notebook, made jokes about how she'd never be as good as me, but she was going to keep trying. Kelvin carved the turkey with his father's old knife, and when he made the toast, he looked directly at me. I want to thank my mother, he said, his voice thick with emotion, for teaching me what real strength looks like, for showing me that sometimes the greatest gift you can give someone is accountability, and for loving me enough to let me struggle so I could learn to stand. He raised his glass. To Mom, the strongest woman I know. Everyone echoed the toast. Even Katerina, who added quietly, and the most patient, thank God. After dinner, Sophia and Leo pulled me aside. Grandma, Sophia said seriously, Mom says you might be moving away to a fancy apartment downtown. I'd been looking at condos, beautiful places with views of the city, close to restaurants and culture and life, places where I could be independent, where I could build my own life separate from being Kelvin's mother or the kid's grandmother. I'm thinking about it, I admitted. Leo's face crumpled. But we'll miss you. Oh, sweetheart. I pulled them both into a hug. I'll still see you all the time. Maybe even more because I'll be visiting by choice, not because I'm right next door and convenient. Promise? Sophia asked. I promise. And I meant it. 2 weeks later, I closed on a beautiful condo downtown. 2 bedrooms, floor-to-ceiling windows, a balcony overlooking the city. It was mine. Completely, totally mine. No guest house, no borrowed space, no compromise. The day I moved, Kelvin and Katerina helped pack. The kids made me a card, construction paper and glitter and stick figure drawings of all of us together. We're going to miss having you next door, Kelvin said, carefully wrapping a lamp in bubble wrap. But we understand why you need your own space, Katerina added. She met my eyes. And we're grateful you chose to be part of our lives at all, after everything. That evening, after the movers left and I was alone in my new space, I stood on the balcony with a glass of wine and looked out at the city lights. My phone rang. Grace. How's the new place? She asked. Perfect, I said. Absolutely perfect. Any regrets? I thought about that, about the last 6 months. About the pain and the growth and the slow, difficult process of rebuilding broken relationships. No regrets, I said. I did what I needed to do, and they learned what they needed to learn. And now we all get to move forward as better versions of ourselves. You sound at peace, Grace observed. I am, I realized. For the first time in years, I actually am. The next morning, I woke up in my new bedroom, made coffee in my new kitchen, and sat on my new balcony watching the sunrise. My phone buzzed. A text from Katerina. Family dinner next Sunday. The kids want to show you their new school projects, and I'm making your pot roast recipe. Fair warning, it might be terrible. I smiled and typed back. I'll be there, and I'll bring dessert as backup. That Sunday, I drove to their house. Not because I lived there, but because I'd been invited, because I wanted to be there. The dinner was lovely. The pot roast was actually pretty good. The kids showed me their projects, Sophia's solar system model and Leo's essay about my hero grandma that made me cry. After dinner, Kelvin pulled me aside. I never properly thanked you, he said, for everything you did. The trust, the support, the tough love, all of it. You're thanking me now, I said. I mean it, Mom. You could have cut us off completely. You could have made us suffer. Instead, you taught us. You gave us a chance to grow. He hugged me tight. I love you. And I'm going to spend the rest of my life making sure you know you're valued. Not for your money, for who you are. As I drove home that night, home to my own space, my own life, I thought about everything that had happened. The hurt, the revenge, the slow, painful healing. And I realized something. The real victory wasn't in the moment I froze the trust. It wasn't in watching them panic or struggle or finally understand my worth. The real victory was in this moment, right now, driving home from a family dinner where I'd been truly welcomed, truly valued, truly loved, not because I was the gatekeeper to their wealth, but because I was me, Beatrice, mother, grandmother, woman, worthy of respect simply by existing. That night, I called my sister Margaret. So, she asked, how'd it go? It went well, I said. Really well. They're actually changing? They're actually changing. Margaret laughed. You know what this means, right? You won. You taught them the lesson, and they learned it. You got your revenge and your family back. I suppose I did, I said. But as I hung up and got ready for bed, I realized something important. This wasn't really about revenge. It never had been. It was about boundaries, about self-respect, about teaching the people you love that kindness without boundaries isn't kindness. It's enabling. And sometimes the most loving thing you can do is let people face the consequences of their actions, even when it hurts, even when it's hard, even when you're not sure it'll work. Because the alternative, staying silent, accepting cruelty, diminishing yourself to keep the peace, that's not love. That's just slow suicide. and I wasn't willing to die quietly anymore. I'd found my voice, I'd found my power, I'd found my worth, and I was never, ever giving that up again. So let me leave you with this. Are you staying quiet in some relationship because it's easier than speaking up? Are you accepting less than you deserve because you're afraid of what will happen if you set a boundary? Are you making yourself small so someone else can feel big? Because I spent 3 years doing exactly that. And the day I decided I was done, the day I decided my dignity mattered more than keeping the peace, everything changed. Not immediately, not easily, but eventually. And it was worth it. Now I want to hear from you. Drop a comment right now and tell me, what boundary do you need to set? What line in the sand are you finally ready to draw? What are you done accepting? Write it down. Make it real. Because saying it out loud, even in a comment section, is the first step to actually doing it. And if this story resonated with you, if it gave you the courage to stand up for yourself, hit that like button and subscribe. Because there are more stories like this coming, stories about people who found their power, set their boundaries, and changed their lives. You're not alone in this, and you're not wrong for wanting better. You deserve respect. You deserve dignity. You deserve to take up space in this world without apologizing. Don't forget that. Thank you for listening to my story.